Cool, we've got Whakatane, Beachlands, brilliant. Warkworth, Auckland, fantastic. Timaru, hey Nikki, glad you made it. And Queenstown, brilliant. So all over the country, right from the top to the bottom, brilliant. Right, let us start. Just so you know, if I'm looking down, it's because I've got the comments coming through on my phone down to the side, so that will look a little bit strange, but I thought that was going to be the easiest way. Right, so let's get into it. So kia ora koutou and welcome to our day 3 live session with Kirsten Simmons and Dani Lebo. Thank you both for joining us. We'll do a formal intro shortly, but I just wanted to start today with a whakatauki that I thought might be quite a nice way to start, and it goes like this. Mā te kimi ka kite, mā te kite ka mohoi, mā te mohoi ka marama. And it translates into meaning seek and discover and know and become enlightened. And I was kind of reflecting on that and thinking, you know, this learning is a journey, and you know, this whakatauki is kind of talking about the conscious effort to seek knowledge. And I think that's what people are doing by coming to a conference like this. They're intentionally going out there and seeking knowledge to kind of, you know, develop and grow. And so I think that was a really nice way to kind of start our day 3 today. Right, reflection from day 2 and day 3. So we had a fantastic live session last night with Julie Frew, all about behaviour is communication. And yeah, I think there were a lot of comments coming through today via email and via messages in the Facebook group just saying how amazing that was. And I think for those who were able to watch it live and for those who get a chance to at a later stage, the fist exercise was really good, lots of feedback about that, and even one teacher had gone back to her centre and had tried it out with her teachers, so that's really cool. There also has been some more great workshops coming through today, and feedback in the group is saying that they're really enjoying the practical side and just that the demonstrations are really good. So thank you to all our presenters who have spent the time recording before the conference so that we could have them available for you this week. So thank you for that. Right. Let us head into some introductions. So I'm going to hand over to each of you to do introductions. So maybe Kirsten, are you able to start us off, please?
Absolutely. Kia ora, ko Aoraki te maunga, ko Waimakariri te awa, ko Wai Downs te marae, ko Mariposa te whenua and Talking Tree Hill, ko Kirsten toku ingoa. So I am delighted to be here with Celia and with Dani. These are two of my favourite nature educators in Aotearoa. We get to do lots of fun things together. So it's beautiful to be here. I am from Waiheke Island, where I run my own creative outdoor educational facility where we mix up nature education. We're just about 100% of the time outside, but with a lot of the creative arts in there as well. So I come originally from a farm in the South Island. Traveled the world, did lots of teaching everywhere. I'm a registered teacher, still am teaching some of the schools at the same time. But my real love and passion is connecting children back to the whenua and connecting them to themselves creatively and innovatively. So I'm still researching and I'm still doing lots of practical stuff with children out here in one-day schools or holiday programs. But it's just a delight to be here, and I'm really looking forward to going through those barriers because they are there. Kia ora.
Alrighty. Tēnā koutou katoa. I te puake a ho ki raro hina maunga Appalachia. I takaro ho I te awa Passaic, no New Jersey a ho, engari no Europa o kutupuna. No reira na mihi nui ki na tangata whenua o tērā whenua, the Leni Lenape. I noho, ki te noho a ho I nai nei I Wanganui, maua ko toko Hoatane Nelson, toko toru na tamariki, ka tia ki te maunga ruapehu ki a rato, ka whangai te awa Wanganui ki a rato hoki. No reira te mihi nui ki tangata whenua o tēnei whenua, te ati haunui a Paparangi. So hi everyone, I'm Dani from the Eco School and I live now in Whanganui. I grew up in New Jersey, in America. And I run the Eco School and we do, a bit like Kirsten, we do a mix. We do a good mix of things. We started doing primarily preschool programs and nature play kind of community-based programs. And now I'm working full-time at an intermediate school where we've implemented a pretty substantial program for an urban intermediate school, 600 student urban intermediate school. We still run holiday programs through the Eco School and we still do some community programming. But my primary, I guess, interest right now is in mainstream schooling and how can we get what is kind of a side movement right now more into mainstream schools and introducing it that way. So yeah, kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou, no ingorangi rawa, no kirehi oku tupuna, ki o tatahi hau e noho ana, ko hua te kere te maunga, ko orare i te awa, ko Marcus Takutānei, ko Luka Raro, Rawa, ko Aria aku tamariki, ko Celia Hogan toko ingoa, he kai whakahaere matua a hau ki Little Kiwis Nature Play, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm Celia from Little Kiwis Nature Play and I'm based down here in Auckland, Christchurch. We started Little Kiwis Nature Play about, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago nearly, and we started this holiday program for preschoolers and we kind of evolved into a bush kindy program and running professional development training for teachers on how to get children outdoors more and engage with nature. So pretty keen on anything nature play, risky play, that kind of stuff. And just, I think, I describe my work as not so much about teaching people new things, but just showing people the way to build their confidence in this space. I think my job is about confidence building pretty much. So that's what we all do. So thank you all for your introductions. I guess what we are here tonight looking at is addressing the barriers of nature education. And sometimes these are big things, sometimes they're just those little questions in the back of our head, or they're coming from other people. And I think it's really good to acknowledge them and then we talk about them, and if we kind of talk about them we learn more about them and we're able to move beyond that barrier once we know a bit more about it. So we're hoping tonight, by not only identifying the barriers, but talking about some possible solutions for people, that's going to be really helpful. If you've got questions, please ask them in the chat and we'll try and get to them at the time, or if not at the end. But we really hope you enjoy this. So I think what we'll do is, I had a bit of a question. I was thinking, what are some of the common barriers for setting up a nature program, either within a school setting, an early childhood setting, or as an external organisation setting up some kind of nature education program? What are some of those barriers that you commonly hear about? So maybe Dani, do you want to start us off for some barriers? Remember to unmute.
Thanks. So I do go around and like Celia and Kirsten, and quite involved in working with different centers and schools. And I think the first one that I always hear when I tell people what I do is, we would never be allowed to do that at our school. We would never be allowed to. And so some of that comes from a real fear of kids getting hurt, or a real safety fear, but some of it is a misunderstanding of regulations or policies, or our ability to work within current regulations. And so I think there's kind of a combination there. People think when they say we would never be allowed to, part of that is saying like, our policies will prevent us from, or part of that is saying our parents or our board or my manager would never allow me to. And so I think there's we could piece out what is behind that, but I think I get that a lot. I would never be allowed to do that.
Yeah. And what about you, Kirsten? Do you resonate with that, or do you get other ones as well as?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the other other barriers, I totally resonate with that, but it's also that people say, well, we don't have any green space, we don't actually have the area around us, or actually our green space is too far away, and we don't have the ratios, and therefore, and also I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do when I get out there. I don't know much about nature. And also, my parents are going to say to me, what are the kids learning? Where is the curriculum in this? Like that, where is the reading and the writing? How's that all fitting? Oh, no, that takes up. No, we don't want to do that. So that's my conversations that I often have with kayako and with the parents as well, around all those kind of barriers of just going, well, what are they actually getting from being out in nature? So, apart from safety and all those ones like that, I find those conversations quite triggering, actually, because we all know the benefits. So those barriers are, they're sort of, a bit silly, you would think.
And I guess they're quite common, though. Like at the start of each workshop that I run, we always look at, what are your hopes and what are your fears, and all this stuff comes out, and people read them and go, oh yeah, and everyone resonates with it. So it's, even though we've been doing it for a long time, we still have barriers. It might not be the exact same barriers, it might be something else, but there's always things that come up in our minds. So when you're starting out on this journey, it's just about being able to go, okay, let's get those out there and figure out what do we need to do, or how can we move through these barriers. And these are the common ones that we all hear, and I guess they fit into a couple of different kind of key themes. Some don't actually, but just that not knowing, it's that confidence, it's not understanding the legislation. It can be around liability, thinking, that something's going to happen to us if a child gets harmed. Sometimes there's money involved, so I don't know if we touched on it then, but just thinking about socioeconomic,
So, and that goes with transport as well, doesn't it?
Yes, and gear, like if we've got a centre or a school that are in a low socioeconomic area, and the idea of having wet weather gear, that that's just way beyond their capacity for thinking, from a cost perspective. So it's just, that's ruled out. So there are some real barriers, but we do want to offer some possible solutions tonight for that. So let's we've lumped them into little groups, and because we had a little bit of a chat beforehand, just to see where we could take this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at those people challenges, which are, if your team, maybe some of your team aren't on board, or your manager or your principal, or someone around you, or a group of people around you are not on board. So why do people not get on board with running nature programs? Kirsten, do you want to kick us up for that? So why do people not get on board with running nature programs? What do you think their main concerns are?
Well, I know I've worked in lots of schools with this, and coming out to Talking Tree Hill as an independent school. And I think a lot of it has to do with squeezing into the curriculum, that there is not enough room. I think that's one of the biggest ones for me, and that there's a fear, there's an absolute fear that if we take, because of the liability that the schools have, that they were then going to be liable for if there's any damages or there's any accidents, and you need to have, do we need to have a first aid person, and the list just goes on and on, actually, because people feel as though people are disconnected from nature. So actually that barrier is right there, right from the word go, because how much time is actually spent outside. So you need to have that really strong advocate, someone in that school that says and is able to talk to the board or talk to the parents and talk to the teachers and say, hey, look, what's the flip side of what happens when these children aren't in nature? And we can see that as what's happening in the world today. So that's one thing that I would always say to people when you're trying to get these education systems in, which this is, this is an education system and an absolute strategy, and it's a curriculum within itself, is that you find the like-minded people and you show them, look, hey, you've got to have some stats on board to say this is what happens when we don't do this with our children. And I think the pandemic's been really good to show that actually how much mental health and wellness happens when you get outside and you breathe. And just on the aside, from a scientific fact, we know that more oxygen to the brain makes the neural pathways bigger, so you can learn more. So if the barrier is that the board or the parents or the teachers are saying, well, my child's not going to learn enough when they're out there doing these things, well, they're going to learn more because the neural pathways are actually bigger to allow that to happen. So yeah, that's what I would say about that from my point of view.
Yeah, fantastic. And Dani, I was just going to say, Dani, because I know you've just done this with the school that you're currently working in. Maybe do you want to come from that perspective?
Yeah, I think when I always talk to schools, or I talk to teachers who are interested in doing this school, I say, go to your principal and tell them that you have a program that is going to work on well-being, that's going to work on scientific literacy. Yeah. It's going to work on behavior management, and it could potentially work on your Tikanga Te Reo Māori integration into your whole curriculum. Tell them you have one program that's going to solve those 4 things, and every principal will be on board. And you know what? It's only going to cost you 1 staff member, or staff member and a TA, depending on how you run it, so when you think about those 4 areas being covered, it's actually quite a low cost compared to what schools are already paying to cover those services. So we spend quite a bit on professional development in behavior management. We spend quite a bit on professional development in Tikanga Te Reo Māori, depending on where your school is. So if we can have one program that can boost all of those things in one and show real outcomes. Physical activity is the other one, right? We're always looking at ways of engaging our kids in physical activity. So if I can have one program that will boost all of those things, and we know the stats are there, in those areas, then it's a no-brainer for schools. It becomes a really easy, even if you forget their curriculum, it's going to sit aside from our curriculum, but we're going to cover all those 5 things. Then the school's like, oh yeah, easy, So I think that's one way to look at it. Instead of looking at what are the kids going to be missing?
Yes.
Are we going to be boosting in their holistic well-being that we're not providing for right now? And that will actually make our school community work in a better way.
It's such a good reframe, isn't it?
Are covered in all of it anyway. Like you've got those 5 solidly down there. So it's always linked to the curriculum. There's never a time when it's not. And it's all, but the main key thing is it's always linked to the holistic development of the child and also the teachers. So, as you say, it covers all of those areas.
Yeah, totally agree. I don't have anything else to add. Fantastic. Well done, ladies. You did talk, Kirsten, just about some of the, the things that you hear, and we're going to talk about those different areas. So like, I guess health and safety is something that does come up, or I'll say as a bit of an excuse, but curriculum is often a big area. It's like, well, how can we fit this in with everything else that we've got? And so I think that reframing that you were talking about, Dani, is fantastic. Really good way to approach it. But let's talk about regulations as well, because regulations are, Dani and I have a lot of, and Kirsten, we all do. We all kind of just go,
we love
them. And I guess, like we're talking about health and safety legislation, even local council guidelines. We're talking about the ratios and water. We mentioned ratios before. We haven't talked about water, but often we hear that these regulations are in place and that means we can't do something. So I reckon, just talking about any of those myths, what are the myths that you hear people tell you when it comes to regulations and ratios and all that kind of stuff? Dani, do you want to start?
Sure. I think the biggest one you get from an ECE one is about there's a regulation that we can't have children near open water.
Yeah.
And that regulation doesn't exist. There's nothing written into the Education Act about that. So there are policies that different centers or that national if you're a Best Start Center or whoever, there are, or YMCA Center, there are policies that people have about that, but there's actually no regulation about it. And so I think And then around primary schools too, we can't take kids in staff cars. We can't take kids in parents' cars. That's a regulation. No, that's not a regulation at all, So yeah, we carpool actually quite a bit at our school. So yeah, I think those are probably the two main ones that I hear around transportation and water are probably, yeah.
Yeah, me too. That's my main ones too, actually. And it's not a regulation, but it's that the fear that those regulations have that install in people to create that barrier as well. So it's not only that the regulations aren't there, but there's the fear of the not, like just not knowing the regulations. So Dani, you right there just allowed people the opportunity to go, oh, okay, so I've just debunked that myth. So it is actually, you kind of need to know your regs like that if you want to get this through, so that you can debunk those myths and make sure that those practices are actually happening, because it is amazing that, and I mean, I do know what people say about that water one, because I know with the Auckland Association, the Kindergarten Association, that was a regulation at that point. So I knew that from a Waiheke perspective, that when I went trying to get them out, they're like, well, no, we can't be around open water. And they did show me that regulation. So it is worthwhile knowing where those are put in on a different centre level, so when you look at that sort of thing, understand, it's like it's place-based education, isn't it? Understand where those regulations come in and when they come out again. Yeah.
And I think
for parent, for teachers, often don't have time to go and read through all the regulations, do they? And so there's a bit of reliance on what someone says to you. So you can have like someone who's been told something once and it kind of gets passed down generation after generation, and that is the gospel. So sometimes it's also about being able to question these things and go, oh, okay, where does it say that? So, you're saying that we have this water regulation. Where does it actually say that? Okay, it's not in the legislation, but what's our policy say? Hey, we can change policy. So is this policy actually serving us well? Is it over the top? And I guess I love to give the example of, if you go take a group down to a river, and the river is like, it's like a little creek and it's that deep. Do you still need your water ratio compared to if you go to the water, which is, a fast flowing river, and you're not actually going near the river, you're just walking beside it without interacting with it, what ratio do you need then? And what about that really big deep puddle that you walk past with the children every day and it's up to their neck? Do you need your water ratio? So we just lost the common sense thinking, oh, if we have this ratio, we are safe. That no, you're not. You still have to manage, the risks of that potential. And if it's a creek this deep and it's not flowing, it's just stationary, do you actually need that ratio? No. So where does common sense fit into our policies?
Right. Right.
And I think the other thing about regulations that can be a little bit confusing is, as a private provider, where do you sit? So it's a little bit easier if you're working within an EC center or a school, then you kind of sit under the Ministry of Education. But if you're not, and you are a contractor, it can become a little bit more difficult to navigate. And so I think it is really worthwhile looking into and doing your own research around, what is your personal liability? What is your company's liability? Who is the person carrying the responsibility for the group in that moment? Is it the ECE center that you're working with, or is it yourself as the contractor? And usually it's both of you, right? Shared together. But it is worth doing a little bit of research into that if you're trying to, say, start up a play group, or starting to go as a private provider and offer your services and say, hey, people can come to my farm and have a nature play. It's just worth kind of thinking through some of those situations about if a child gets hurt, who is the person responsible, and what responsibilities do I have as a provider versus what the school has? And sometimes there is a little bit of conflicting within those regulations on, some regulations might cover the ministry, but might not cover a, play group. Well, playgroups are such a gray area, but I guess holiday programs are the one. Holiday program sits outside the Ministry of Education, so that's totally different regulations than if you were an ECE center or if you were working within a school. So it's worth kind of knowing what you want to navigate.
Yeah, and I found that with Talking Tree Hill, I was really surprised when I mean, it took me, and another thing to say about this as well is it can take you a bit of time to get schools and things on board. So you have to do the mahi on that one, you know, to engage and get them out. But I was really surprised when I got the tick off from both of the schools here on Waiheke, that actually it's the board of trustees that sits with having, you know, they have the regulations about having the children out here. I thought it would be the school, but and myself joint, of course, we would, you know, we would be sued if something really badly went wrong. But it's actually the board of trustees that hold that space. So that was really interesting for me to find out. I was like, wow, that seems quite crazy that it would be the board that does that. So yeah, interesting.
So it's good to be, when you're doing these, like communicating with your board.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If you're within a school situation, communicating with your board is really essential part of this.
Yeah, it's having the principal and the board speaking the same language, and then you being that person in between to support that nature program that you want to start. And if you get those two, then it's like, sweet.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, I reckon we'll keep moving on. So we've kind of touched on the people factor, the regulations that can be a barrier. And I guess just thinking about when, you know, as far as how to help you, just definitely asking, going, okay, you know, is this legislation or is this a policy? And also just, I think it's, knowing who the people are who decide, you know, so if that's your centre manager, or if that's an owner, or if that's your board of trustees, but also if you're an external provider, EONs provide a lot of support in that space, or have some information from education outside the classroom and contractors and stuff. So that's a place that you can go and look, and we can link that in if anyone's interested. The next area that we're going to talk about, which I quite enjoy, which is, you know, the potential for injury or harm, where that sounded wrong, didn't it? Yeah, not I quite like, but it's a favourite conversation area. Accidents, and, you know, even children getting lost or going missing, you know, these are all things that come up in that kind of harm or gone missing group management when we're out in nature. So, you know, let's define what an injury is and what an injury isn't. Who wants to go with that one?
An injury is not a bruise or a scratch in my world. Well, it is, but it's a really tricky one, actually, because, you know, you have to have your disclaimer. For me, it's like everyone who knows you're coming out to Talking Tree Hill, here's the disclaimer for injuries or for whatever's happening, is that children are going to be outside, they're going to be in nature, they're going to be climbing. So there's different levels of, I guess, what injury would be. And that is knowing that the low level risk injury is that there will be bruises and scratches simply by climbing up a tree or falling over a stick. You know, I have little ones who are just falling over on the ground on grass, you know, like they just haven't got their balance, or all of those kind of things. So I think when I think about injuries and defining them, is that there's different levels of them as well, and that you need to know what, you know, be aware of what your different levels are, and also the different people that you have out with you when you're out doing these kind of things. Everyone has their own, like, what they think is a bad injury or a small little incident or a whatever. So you have to know within your group what that looks like, because injuries look very different to different people. Obviously, a broken arm is a serious accident, right? Absolutely.
I'm going to question that.
Yeah, no, but if you were looking at from a health and safety perspective,
even from a health and safety perspective. So I'll share some information. Like, you're right, it does have the potential, but from under the health and safety legislation, they do give an example of a broken arm. And so they say if a child falls out of a tree at lunchtime at school, and they go to hospital and they break their arm, they get the arm put in a cast and they're discharged, that is not a notifiable event as far as work safe goes, so that you don't have to notify work
But
safe. So hold on.
Yeah.
But then
Wait for a second,
I
because I was
haven't finished the
how
whole
people
example.
felt about it though. not from that side, not from regular. I was talking about how people's different dispositions would feel about that being a serious one. You're right though. Yeah. But carry on with that.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, cool. I misunderstood. But I'll carry on with the example because it is kind of good.
Do.
Because then the other side that they give an example of is the same situation. Someone falls out of a tree, breaks their arm, goes to hospital, but it needs surgery. So they are admitted to hospital, and then that is a notifiable event. So you've got, the same situation, but one's more serious than the other. And you're absolutely right, Kirsten. Sorry, I wasn't listening. I was probably just getting ready to come in,
It's all good, Seals.
But yeah, it is. And like we use the terms learning injury and life-altering injury, and that we find that really helps also parents as well as teachers, going, actually, it's okay to get these little cuts, bruises, scratches. And we at Little Kiwis Nature Play put in that simple broken bone, simple broken arm into the learning injuries, because it's not a notifiable event. But anything where there is potential for life-altering accidents, that's our job as a teacher, isn't it, or an educator outside, is to prevent all that significant life-altering harm. Yeah. Dani, I don't know what you want to add, some stuff.
Yeah, I would say that our responsibility as educators, like we all take it really seriously, right? And so no one wants to see one of our kids get hurt, and principals feel the same way. So, I have had principals just outright reject it because they feel like every child who's under their watch for that day is their responsibility, and they take that very seriously. But I think the other thing that we can add in here is that idea of risk-benefit analysis. And so looking at, if I'm protecting them so much, what are they missing out on, right? So if tree climbing is the best example for this, I think this is the one I always use, right? So what are they going to learn from climbing the tree? Is there potential for injury? Yes, there is. How can I prevent those catastrophic, we call them catastrophic, life-altering injuries? How can I prevent those while still allowing them to get the benefit of this activity? So I guess that is the other thing that comes with risk, is not just looking at the risk, but looking at the benefit from the activity, and how can we still get that benefit while avoiding these catastrophic or life-altering injuries. And that's our job, right? That's one of the main jobs as a nature educator, is to find that line where we're allowing them to have these learning moments, which come with risk. All learning is risk. There is no learning without risk at all, And so we do need to walk the edge of that line a little bit. And obviously I play it more conservative with other people's kids than I do with my own kids. But so the line might shift depending on the group you have or whose kids they are. And if they're yours, maybe the line's up here. But, so that's always that judgment call that we're making in that moment. And that comes a little bit with experience, but it also comes with knowing with each activity I do, what's the potential for a catastrophic injury and what's the potential for a learning injury. So I've already thought about that ahead of time. With fire, a burn on the finger, learning injury. Falling into the fire, catastrophic injury, so I've already thought about what the potential injuries are, what the risks are, and how I can set my setup to prevent those catastrophic injuries or minimize the likelihood of those happening.
And that's why it's so important to know your risk assessments and to have done a site visit before you're going anywhere new, where you look at those the space and work out, okay, well, what could possibly, what are the potential hazards here? What are the things that I need to remember, so that you can actually gauge how your risk assessment, because we're always doing risk assessments in action, right? So it's whatever you have on a plan is absolutely fantastic, and you want to know that you're doing those things, but you need to be able to action them, and that everyone's on board to be able to do that, because you do need to have your team allowing those risk benefits and having the clear words that you use, and knowing the differences between the terminologies that we're using at the moment, and that's clear for everyone, because that's when more accidents or injuries can happen, when people aren't on the same page about how you're out in a space and how you're interacting with it. So that's what I would add that too.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Kirsten, because so many people go and do these programs. They go and going out on a nature excursion, but they've never been to the site that they're going to, or they've been there but they haven't looked at it from what I would say a risk perspective. They haven't gone there and checked in all the different corners of the site, or if that's possible, some sites are so open that that's not possible, but you need to actually go there and get into the bushes and see what is in there and know it, because that will also calm you down as well. You go, okay, well, if I've checked on the site and I know that these are the 3 kind of significant injuries that could happen on the site, then I know that that's what I need to manage there. I don't need to worry about all the other stuff. I just need to think about those 3 things. And we just manage that with our group by letting them know what those are and talking to them, or keeping them away from one area, or saying, that needs direct supervision when you're there. So that's a really key one, I think. And I think that builds confidence with people once they've known, oh, we actually have to go and look at the site that we're spending time in before we go there. Yeah.
And because some activities are more site specific than others, you're not necessarily going to have a fire in a really, really dense, low, you just got to think about, again, what we always go back to with nature education is common sense. You think about it, you look at your space, you think, okay, what actually can work really effectively? And most things actually can, but just know your space and know your place.
Yeah. Cool.
The other one, I mean, it can get a bit heavy talking about risk and injury, and it's a bit of a downer, but I think one thing that we have to remember is that Health and Safety Act, what it requires of you is to take all practicable steps. So if an injury, even a catastrophic injury, happens and you're the person in charge, if you can show that you've taken those practicable steps, not practical, but practicable steps, then all good, so not all good in that has happened. I mean, you might change your practices, you might change your policies, you might even, stop doing it, but you're not going to lose your house if you have taken practicable steps to ensure that injury doesn't happen. And what that looks like in each situation is different. But I think that sometimes we can get really afraid of our own personal liability. But that Health and Safety Act doesn't say that. It doesn't say that just because you're the one providing the activity that you are necessarily liable if something happens. It just says that if you're the person in charge of the activity, that you have to be aware of what steps you should be taking to manage that risk. And sometimes those steps are just notifying people this is the risk, or so I think it can feel quite heavy in that risk liability zone, but it doesn't have to feel that heavy.
And the other thing is, just one last comment would be that in the latest health and safety legislation, everybody is responsible. So just remember that your children who are there with you are also responsible, as are you, as are any parents or any supporting staff. Everyone has responsibility. So make sure you use that. So, with our tamariki, it's letting them know that, hey, how do we keep ourselves safe in this area? Or, hey, this is what we do to keep ourselves safe. What if you see someone doing something that's not so safe? What do you do then? So empowering them with what they have to do to help you in that, in their role with safety. So the other thing that's happening in the conversation, the chat, is a few questions around risk benefit assessment. So there's a lot online with those, and I'm sure some of us have some examples of those, but if not, who was it? Tim Gill was the original kind of, him and a group of people from the UK. They created the first kind of official risk benefit assessment. And so if you search him, Tim Gill risk benefit assessment, you'll get an example one and you'll get a blank one. For me, I when I first found them, I was like, oh, this is great, but then it didn't quite fit with my way of thinking, so I kind of adapted it to me. So don't be afraid to adapt it. Go, yeah, this is great, I understand this is how it can work in our situation. So for us, I just have a list of kind of all the benefits of whatever it is, either just general nature education or tree climbing or mud play or whatever, just what those benefits are, and then the risk assessment and stuff. So people will do it differently, but I'm sure if you search online, you'll be able to find some good examples.
For me, I find it useful if a specific center says that they can't do an activity, then we do a risk benefit on that one activity. So I don't usually run it on like a whole program, but like, we can't do fires. Okay, well, let's let's, as a staff,
Yeah.
run a risk benefit on fires, or let's run a, whatever it is that is the
Yeah.
sticking point for
Yeah.
that school or that center.
Yeah.
Can be
Same
That's
really-
a really
I
good
add
point.
column.
Yeah.
I add a column just beside what the hazard is, and then we just put it in, and it's really simple and really
Yeah,
quick
cool.
to do, and you quickly outweigh which is which. So just
Fantastic.
adding in one column for it's simple.
Yay. So there you go, team. You've got some good practical ideas there for risk benefit assessments, and just thinking about, risk management and accidents and harm and children getting lost, etc. Let's move on. Just in the interest of time, we're going to talk about accessibility for neurodiverse children, differently abled. This is Dani's all over this.
Dani, you do that.
yeah, you're going
This
to
is your
build on this.
bag.
So, and for physically impaired students, and Dani's been doing quite a bit of stuff in this space. So, how can we provide more accessible spaces for our learners when we're talking about nature education, Dani?
Yeah, I've been doing a bit of work in this. So we run a holiday program. We run an adaptive holiday program at the Eco School. And there's a few things that we've kind of found out. There is some funding around this. So Tu Manawa Fund is one that is, for us, that's through Sport Wanganui, but it would be probably through Sport Canterbury or whoever is your regional sports provider. That fund can provide some support specifically around getting different groups of people physically active. And one of those is neurodiverse or differently able people. And the other one is the Halberg Foundation. They provide support services for kids to go, physically disabled kids to go to camps and stuff. And they have gear that they can give you. So all-terrain wheelchairs, stuff like that. And you can just borrow it for good amounts of time. So those are two kind of resources in terms of that. But what we found
all over New Zealand, Dani?
Yeah, Halberg is all over, and the Tu Manawa Fund is just, I think it's administered through different sports foundations. Yeah. So I think what we've come up with after doing this, we're just a year into this now, doing the adaptive program, is the first thing is staffing. Is that you just need to really look at your staffing. And so the first time that a child comes out with us, we give them a one-on-one, and that funding was provided to us through Tu Manawa. So we applied for a full year's worth of funding to have one-on-one staff members. So the first day they come out, they get a one-on-one, and then we know from there what they need and what they don't need. And almost always they don't need a one-on-one after that. We can make it work once we know the kids, but it makes them feel more confident. It makes us feel more confident if we know we have that staffing support there. If you're working within a school setting and you don't have the Tu Manawa funding yet, I would say look at using your TA funding in creative ways. Our school does that really well. We move TAs around a lot in order to accommodate those kids, to give them the experience. The other thing I would say is that we can always change our programming up. So when we look at, sometimes we get stuck in a little hole of like, this is what my nature play program looks like. It's always at this site, or we do this, and this is our daily routine. But if we kind of come back to the foundations of why we created the program, that it can help us see how we can make it accessible to different kids. So when I think about my program, I think I want risk, I want nature immersion, and I want curiosity or wonder is what I say. So child-led learning. And so right now we have a couple students at our school that have a higher level of physical needs that we can't cater for in our traditional program that we were running. And so we've really looked at like, well, what other sites are there around? Could we run a nature play program at the Botanic Gardens that has access for wheelchairs? And what would that look like for the rest of the class? And what would that do to the social dynamic of that class? And how can we make it still as exciting for the rest of the kids so they don't resent the fact that this other child is in their class? And asking the family, is this something that you would really be into? And so I think if we go back, the foundations of my program are these three things. How can I make those happen, even if it has to be on my school site? And so I'll tell you, for our child with the highest needs right now, we have a massage table that we can put in the back of the van because they need a changing table. They can have a shorter day. And the transport, we've had to find funding for the transport. But other than that, once those barriers were met, because this child actually doesn't toilet. So that wasn't a barrier there. Once we found a place for them to change privately and the transport was sorted, then it was like, oh, sweet. Yeah, their motorized wheelchair can go here, here, and here. And it was doable. And the other kids were actually excited because they had their first forest school day without this child. And then they came up with, well, what could we do? How could we make this work? So that was really powerful. So yeah, I always say there's no reason why we can't get anyone out there. We've had blind children out, we've had deaf children out, we've had all sorts of neurodiversities out, which, I mean, those kids, they love us neurotypes. We thrive out there in the forest. But yeah, so I just say the sky's the limit, really. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Nice.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Kirsten?
No, I think Dani's got that all covered. She knows her schniz around this one.
Yeah.
Hey, so happy to leave it there.
Yeah, fantastic. You made me think a little bit about, we get a lot of children with ADHD coming to our bush kindy, and one of the common things that parents say is they'll kind of come up to you at the start, or they'll send an email through and say, oh, look, my child doesn't cope with this, and this is going to go wrong, and they're going to do this, and it's going to be, they're really worried. And, for sure, absolutely, I get that. More often than not, what we notice is that we don't see any of the stuff that the parents have just told us, all the things that are going to go wrong for that child in that environment. And that's been really powerful for parents that we've worked with, that they've gone, wow, my child thrives in this environment. They're not doing all these things that stress me out and stress my child out. And I think that's really empowering for parents to see their children in an environment like that, where they do thrive in a majority of situations. So.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, they pull up and they're like creeping in, waiting to hear the bad news. And like, oh,
yeah,
such and such had a great day.
They were
like,
amazing.
They did.
Really? Yeah, they were a leader.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, fantastic. Right, let's move on to the next one. We're going to look at kind of some of those other barriers around money and equipment and costs of transport and logistics and those kind of things. So what are the options for centres and schools where gear, equipment, money are a challenge, or are going to be the big barrier for them? What are some of the options that these organisations or schools or centres have?
You've got to be creative, like you've got to go to the op shops. You've got to go and have a look around that what can be gifted. I know that at some of the schools that I set up, winter, those barriers at the schools, the children can't afford to have jackets and gumboots. So you set up a jacket and gumboot exchange. And we do that at Talking Tree Hill, and we've done it at the local primary schools. So once you don't fit those gumboots, you put it into the gumboot exchange, and you can do it that way, and you can pass it on, and it's all free. That's where I always start. Okay, well, what can we get for free, and what isn't so difficult? Because at the other end is that you're going for partnerships. You contact corporates. You do fundraising that is specific for your nature education program. But first, look at the resources that you have around you. And if you're in schools or early childhood centres, that's your teachers, that's your parents, that's all the people there. And kids are always growing out of jackets, and they're always growing out of gumboots. So, and sun hats, like we have a stack of sun hats. I've never brought any for Talking Tree Hill, ever. And we have a whole stack of jackets that that kids can use. Because the thing that I've noticed is a lot of jackets nowadays don't actually keep out the rain, like there's a lot of flimsy little jackets and things around, but they will keep them dry enough. And if you have more things, you can put on more layers. Yeah. So I think, the other side of it is having more layers of things, but just get get those first things, work out what you need, and work out what your community can provide. And also within that community, there can be more philanthropic interests that people go, do you know what? I really want to give some money to this. I love that this nature program is going to come. That's happened to me. It's happened into the schools as well. And then if you've worked on that beautiful relationship with the board of trustees and the principal, or every school fundraisers, so can we just take the $500 each whenever and work it out? What is it that we need? Oh, we need to take a trolley. Oh, we need this, we need that. Work out what you need, work out how you can get it for free. And and boom, you're there.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know
Yeah.
a lot of the centres I work with, they talk about applying for funding, you know, like it might be Lions money or whatever, and they apply for funding and they'll get $500, and that just gets them a full set of wet weather gear. And there's some great organisations here in New Zealand that do make kind of wet weather gear for preschool age children and also for primary age children. So you've got Mudmates, you've got Therm, you've got Mum to Mum. So, you know, that's 3 great kind of Kiwi brands that are doing it. And there's more, I think, puddle jumpers as well. So yeah, so there's that funding kind of way. And I love the op shop using your local people.
It just takes it back to that, what we're actually trying to do, right? Is to, you know, understand the planet and connect with her rather than having to always go into the protect. You know, having those more zero waste principles and looking at that sustainability models and net positive models of doing this first, because there's so much gear, there's so much you know, there's so much gear out there, and people are very good to bring it in. So I would even say that before even looking at having to go through funding and you might not get it, that what have you got? You know, what have you got around you?
I'll be a little bit I'm a little bit of a different opinion in that we have an exchange, we have a gear collection point at our school, and I use that for my underlayers. But for my outer layer, I would say invest in very high quality rain gear, especially if you're in a lower socioeconomic area, because those kids don't have a lot of spare gear at home. So yeah, they might borrow your stuff, but kids are really hesitant, especially as they get older, to put on other people's clothes, and having really good wet weather gear that everyone wears all the same will kind of eliminate some of those barriers. Because if you're in a center that has a mixed population and you've got kids who have really nice gear, and then the kids who don't have really nice gear, they're coming in and they're always borrowing the secondhand gear or whatever, it can be a barrier. It can be a social barrier there. And so a good set of gear is expensive, but it's not that expensive. I mean, our school, I think we spent $2,000, which is a lot, but it's not that much. It's not 50 grand, you know? And so, and $2,000 you can come up with a couple Lions foundations, a couple of sausage sizzles, a lot of sausages, you know, you can come up with that kind of money. It's not too hard. And in a big school, you might even be able to find that in the budget. But then you have that and everyone's wearing the same stuff. And I know it's really good quality gear. So I know that everyone's at least starting our winter days with that outer layer that is solid, and then our underneath layer, we totally do a gear swap. But for me, I would say if you're in a wealthier area, you probably don't have to worry about it as much because the kids will have decent gear. But if you're in an area where you have a mixed population, then I want everybody to be in the same stuff that I know is really good quality. And I know it hasn't been 7 years gone through the washer and has lost its waterproofing and da 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 da. So I would say that's probably one thing that I would really invest some money in, and scrape together and find it in some way. And there's lots of ways to kind of come up with that chunk of change. Once you get more than $2,000, it gets a little harder to find to scrape together that. But gumboots secondhand for sure, sneakers, under layers, fleeces, polar fleeces. Oh my gosh, polar fleeces out the ears. We get so many. Betacraft is the company that we use in terms of gear. They made them right in Palmerston North.
And that's it. Sometimes you find those local providers who can support you in a different way as well. Like that's great. Fantastic. I'm going to keep us moving. Just I see we're getting quite close to 9 o'clock. And we've got 2 more kind of areas to talk about. And the first one is just when people say that they don't know enough to be able to take kids out, that they don't know enough about nature, they're worried about, what's poisonous, how do we toilet in that space, or they're just quite risk averse themselves. What do we offer up for those people? What would you say to someone who is kind of like, I don't know enough? Kirsten.
Learn more. I mean, we were all curious. That's
boom.
That's so straight up. Learn more. But you don't need to know heaps. It's just get out in nature and play for a start. Don't academic it, just get out, be curious and see what happens. So that's what my starting point always is. Just, know how beneficial this is, and then just get out and do it. Being nature ed or being nature educators and doing what we do, it's not, we don't have to know, and we're not going to know all the trees and the plants. I mean, please do have books and stuff to tell you about the poisonous, and strategies around mushrooms or different things. But there's so many edible plants within New Zealand, but you can get that from a book or an app that you have right on your phone. Just make it simple and make it easy. You do not need to study for hours and hours beforehand. You go out, you go into your space, you see what's there, you've done your site visit, you know what's going on, you take the books out. I mean, it's really exciting finding that knowledge with the children when you're doing it at the same time. And you can do that. I think, my whole thing is just keep it simple. We over intellectualize, then you don't just get out there. So get out there and learn with the children, the student agency and kayako agency at the same time. So I'm quite big on that one as well. It's like that as a barrier. Oh, I don't know. Well, you just learn as the kids are learning. Totally. It's okay to fumble and be vulnerable and not know your stuff. We don't all know our stuff. We know good chunks of what we do because we love it so much. But actually, there's so much more than just what is the name of a plant. Yeah. You've made a nature journal and you've taken it out there and the kids are drawing the plant. They're stamping it into some clay. They're just using what's around them to explore. So I like that one. Oh, look at the wee trigger that happened there. It's like, just do it.
Yeah, you're off.
Be curious. Hey, Dani.
Yeah, 100%. But I liked what you said, Celia, in our chat before this. You said this is a problem that affects women more than men probably. And I think that's true. Like, my male staff are like, let's go, like, let's do this, let's that. And the women's staff are like, oh, like generally, not all. Like I'm probably a bit more gung-ho than most, but it does seem to be like I don't know. It does seem to be like women feel like they need to have some kind of base level of knowledge before they'll jump in, or like I can't teach this unless I fully know it all myself, and I think you're right, Kirsten. Like, there's that kayako and ako are hand in hand, right? That you can't be a kayako if you don't have ako. You can't be a teacher unless you're learning as well. So
awesome. Love it. Totally.
Let's do it.
Boom. Next one, last one. I'll start on this one. This one's talking like about the outdoor environment, saying, some people just say it's not very engaging or find it hard to make links to the curriculum. And I think, especially schools, a lot, you go into schools and they're quite manicured spaces. So we actually, it can be a barrier, but we also need to realize that we can actually make changes to those spaces. We can create an outdoor classroom in those spaces. And there's so much reading online, and there's lots of courses and opportunities to kind of figure out how you can do that, or just through following people's Facebook pages is amazing to go, get inspired. But just thinking about, okay, well, what would be an awesome outdoor environment? What would that look like? What would you want? What kind of learning do you want to take place in that environment? And just starting on that journey, having discussions, creating plans, and then just making it happen. Like when I'm thinking about outdoor spaces that are traditionally grass, it's like, okay, well, let's get some planting in. Planting is a great place to start. Plants, some sensory experiences through there. Maybe it's creating like mud kitchen, or muddy kind of play space. Maybe it's thinking about, some risky play or loose parts, so it's just kind of bring it in. Because I know like one of the other barriers is that people kind of go, oh, well, we can't go off site. And it's like, but you've got a huge site already. Why don't you make that your outdoor nature play space? So I just really encourage people to think or challenge their school environment. I'm probably more talking about school environments here. Challenge their school environment and kind of start some conversations about what could you change about the space to make it more of an outdoor classroom. For early childhood centres, similar, loose parts, I think, are a great way, like an intermediate kind of way to bring in some more natural play. It's not exactly nature play, but it's creating some of those similar skills, or providing opportunities for those different risky play elements, or for your different schema to play out. So I'm a big advocate for loose parts in a school environment, and that's actually a really good way to start. Links into what Kirsten was saying, checking in with your local whānau, your community, and getting loose parts from people who are within that community. Just being really clear about what it is that you're wanting, and getting those in. So yeah, I think that sometimes just gives us a bit more confidence to realize that we have the ability to make changes with our landscape. You just need to get some people on board for that. Other thoughts?
So good. Go down to your local dump.
Yeah.
And you get one person down there, they'll just keep things aside for you to grab.
Yeah, make that relationship.
Give them a list and go to the dump. We take them down. You can't, obviously, in the last couple of years, but like there's so much cool stuff that comes out of there, right?
Yeah. Any other thoughts on outdoor environments before we sign off, or ask any questions?
No, but it did make me think about one that we kind of didn't talk about was staffing, and kind of the cost of staffing. And when you were saying reach out to your community, I think that's the easiest way to reduce your staffing cost. So if you're in a school or in an ECE center and ratios are your problem, then we've had the biggest whānau engagement that we've had in our intermediate school through forest play, through forest school. And so we had 100 families out last year with us, and granddads, uncles, aunties, grandmas. We had the whole lot. So that can be an easy way if you say, oh, we're not confident taking a whole class out to the forest, but maybe I can get 2 parents to come out with me. Cool. Then that brings my ratio down to 1 to 8, So, and that can also sometimes solve some of your transport issues as well. Yes, I think that, and your skill. If you're not as comfortable, put a call out to your family. And it's interesting, the families who are generally, I find families that are more comfortable in the forest, in the bush, on the farm, are the ones that are a little more hesitant to engage in school activities. So it's a really nice way to get those whānau involved in school and say, hey, we really need someone who is confident hunter to come out to the bush with us. And you'll get people who raise their hand who might otherwise not engage in your school community. So it can be a real bonus, getting those families in the door.
Yeah. And something that can help, like I always encourage that as well, getting helpers. It's amazing. But also just being really clear with what their role is in those situations, so that they know that their role is there for, maybe it's head counting, for safety, for helping with, man the kai area, or whatever those roles are, but that it's not about spending time on their phone or being distracted. And I say that just because when I first started running programs with centres, I saw that with parent helpers, they'd just be there and they'd be on their phone. I was like, oh, hang on, we actually need to tell these people what they need to be doing. So just thinking about that.
Because people like a role too, don't they? They sometimes run their phones because they don't know what they're meant to be doing. How am I meant to be helping them? They sort of feel a bit silly, or a bit like, oh,
yeah.
But if you have a job, and okay, well, that's me. I'm on head count. All right, well, I've got the head count down. Yeah, it's perfect because it's empowering. Empowering for them too. Yeah,
they know what's expected. Fantastic. Right, well, we've got through a huge amount tonight. I'm going to ask in the chat, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat now, and we will answer those. We've gone slightly over time, but we'll give a maximum another 5 minutes. But if there are no questions come through, we'll just call it. That's it. But I think we have covered an awful lot, haven't we? Oh, good. Good. Right, have we got anything coming through?
When are we going to hang out again, you guys?
Yeah, and all the rest of it on Facebook.
Who wants to join our hangout? Who's out there on Facebook?
It's true though, Dani.
Let's go.
Right, I'm not seeing anything come through. I'm just having a wee scroll back to make sure we've all done, all making sense. No, I'm going to call it. Cool. Thank you both. That was amazing. And we're getting a couple of thanks coming through. One person is interested in how to advise parent helpers of their role and get them to stay as observers. Yeah, and
I think Do you do that too? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Sometimes
like we have just a
print it out.
checklist or laminated
Yeah,
something, and
pass
I just give them to parents every time and go, this is what your role is, this is, you know, from safety, etc. So
and then
Yeah,
you
we
can
just have a
ad-lib
little
there.
meeting.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
meeting at the beginning, and then you can ad lib from that list if it's different from if you're on a different site or something else comes up. Always have that little hui at the beginning.
yeah, Hui's always good, and that's for the kids as well, for
Right.
tamariki, parent help. Covered so much, thanks, you guys are awesome.
And with our
You know, if there are
final
any rules around fire at school, no, that fits under health and safety, you know, your own risk management of that. What you do need to apply is the check it's all right website. You need to check that you are able to, and that there's no kind of fire ban in place in your region, because that will take into consideration different councils' regulations. So here in Canterbury, pretty much most of the summer we just don't have fires because it's so dry and there's always a fire ban. But even this year, when we haven't had a fire ban, it's been so green, and I just still like, oh no, we'll just kind of not have fires. So it's just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Right, anything else? We'll finish with this question, okay? So this is, do you come across the entry fee to attend like a nature-based program, a one-day school, as a barrier? And if so, what do you suggest?
Yep.
Yes.
So I can jump in on that because that's been a constant letdown. He's like, yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so it is a barrier. There's no question around it. Depending on, like for me, it's for a nature school, it's a whole day. So we've right from the word go had to set up scholarships. We've set up a trust. You can apply for funding from different places. You can get partnerships from local businesses. It is a barrier, and you do have to do the work on that to find out how it's not a barrier. And that can take time and money to do that at the same time. But, you know, there are lots of places that you can get that from. Oranga Tamariki as well. We get funding through them for specific children. So it's like knowing the child, and also for our like holiday programs, we're Oscar accredited. So, you know, and for after school, we're Oscar accredited. So yeah, you just have to, again, reach out into the community and find out what's around you, and from the government as well.
And I guess there are such a variety of different programs. So you've got the one-day school model, you've got playgroups, you've got homeschool community groups, and then you've got lots of schools and centres who are doing nature excursions or forest school programs. So I think the more variety there is, the more we can cater for everyone. And yeah, so, you know, like I love seeing it happening in the schools and in the centres, because that's catering for children, but there is still a need in some places for the one-day school model. And unfortunately it isn't, you know, funded by the Ministry of Education, so it is user pays, but there are, like Kirsten said, some creative ways of bringing those costs down for people. Cool. Right, that's us. I will end us there. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. And if there are any questions, any further questions, you can ask in the chat on the live stream. It should show up on the page still. And then I'll also put this recording into the Nature Educator group for people as well. So any questions that come up, we can answer then. So awesome. Thank you, everyone. And I will finish us there. Ka kite.
Thanks, Celia, for all this week, darling. You've done a great job. Amazing.
Keep it up.
Woo!